Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast which asks which movies are well worth watching and remembering for all time. Every episode we discuss a different piece of film history to decide if it should make its way into our movie vault. Filled with questions, trivia and crazy challenges, it's the perfect way to deep dive into a myriad of movies. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a glimpse of what to expect in today's episode. It sounds like the kind of chaos Craig would kind of appreciate in a way.
Slightly. I'm just more thinking, do we dare let Mary know about that scene? Because she might just be like, no, don't hit your hands. I don't know why I did the Scottish accent then. To be clear, Mary, I know you're going to be listening. That is not how I think you sound.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? Great Scott!
I'll be back.
Here's Johnny.
Oh, hi, Mark.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman.
It's not the boss. It's a silly Lucino. I'll get you, my pretty.
To infinity and beyond.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that asks which movies are well worth watching and which deserve to be remembered for all time. I'm your host, David Osger, and I'm joined by my co-host, who, due to his own history of violence, cannot be announced with his real name. So please welcome my friend, Joey Jojo Jr. Shababadoo.
That's the worst name I've ever heard.
The correct response to that joke. Craig, Joey, how are you?
Yeah, fine. I mean, it's ironic. You talk about my long history of violence, and yet this is the first episode I've recorded in person with you for like quite some weeks.
I was going to say history of violence against me, but then I thought it'd be a bit of a conflict of interest if I was then introducing you into, like you said, the same room as me.
You need to stop talking now.
Basically, that was a joke I was thinking throughout this entire film, so I had to sort of creep that into there somewhere.
Well, it's good to see that this film was thought-provoking enough that you could only think about jokes for the podcast itself.
More just how my mind usually operates, in which I could only think of Simpson references. But it did get me thinking, actually, in terms of like how you'd react to this film, because I think when I've been looking back, especially now that we're almost at our 100th episode, but especially within the era of these film suggestions, each episode connecting to the next, when I think of films that are suggested by other Well Good Movies crew members or guests, which then is your first experience of watching said film, you don't have a great experience of enjoying those films. Especially, I think, within the last year. I think there's probably more positives the year before, but I think 2023 especially. So is this going to be another case of that, or is this quite a sort of a turnaround?
Look, I mean, I think we just have to find out at this point. Honestly, I think it'd be more impressive if you were able to get any emotion out of me for this film whatsoever. Okay,
well, that should make VHS Corner interesting this week, as you'll be back in the chair giving us some facts for that. So excited for that part, at least.
Just another day in the office.
Fair enough. Okay, well, we are not alone on this episode. So also joining us is another member of the Well Good Movies crew, but this time a bit less scantily dressed than he was for Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's Christopher Maxwell. Hello, Chris.
Hello there. How are you?
And I'm glad I wrote that intro because it's true. You're wearing a hat now, which you didn't have last time, as we've established in the hats journey within Well Good Movies.
Now I'm wearing a hat and nothing else.
This is just you testing your friend now. If he says that, why were you just wearing a hat? Then you know he's picked up on that.
Oh yeah. I'm watching you, tricking me with this psychic knowledge. No, you just listen to the stuff that I'm in, which is a very nice way of terrifying me. He watches my stuff, listens to my stuff, and then taunts me with it. I suppose it's a nice bit of playfulness in a terrifying way. It's my fault for just having a bad memory. I have a really bad memory.
I don't know which you need a good memory for more, VHS Corner or the Movie Vault, because obviously this means that you are helping us over on the Movie Vault, which is your usual position as when you join us here. But I was wondering what you think the the context of today's film should be in, which was sort of the question in my head without going too much into today's film. Do you think this is more a Cronenberg discussion or films of 2005 discussion?
So the film is still fresh, as I've not long watched it. I decided to give it a nice full watch earlier.
Yeah, I'd hope your memory is good enough for that, at least, that you're able to remember it for the podcast.
In a way, I'd say it's probably more of a mid 2000s, because I genuinely forgot this was a Cronenberg film. And then it was only when his name appeared at the very beginning, and I was like, oh, of course. And I've watched a lot of David Cronenberg's work, but from the 80s. There's parts of this film where I was like, that's David Cronenberg. But this did feel genuinely like a completely different film for him, and definitely felt like a mid 2000s movie, in the nicest possible way. It's not me saying, it's very much of its time. No, it was more just the fact that like you could feel that the era that it was in. But I won't give too much more away about it. So I'd say maybe a 2000s film.
Okay, we'll get to it. We'll expand more later. But yeah, I'm glad we got that context over in the movie vault. But yeah, you're not alone in being a Chris on this podcast, because we are joined by another Chris, which is our special guest this week, marking their second time on the show. This time actually talking about a full-length film. It is film and music journalist Chris Connor. Hello, Chris.
Hello. Yeah. Oh, the last time it was 2 Christmas short films, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's generous calling them.
Craig had specific opinions about Olive the Other Reindeer and its worthiness of being a film.
It was that one and, oh God, Angela's Christmas or something like that. Angela's Christmas
and
Wish.
Robin as well. It was like sort of suggestions from the 2 guests on that one. I guess through that we can talk about maybe the Christmas just gone, because this is, we're still in February. I can ask you how Christmas went, only in the realm of movies, because last time you did talk to us about Christmas movies. So at the cinema, obviously it was probably not the most festive Christmas season for cinematic releases. Wonka maybe being the closest. How was your kind of cinema going experiences in the festive period?
Christmas, I saw Ferrari, which was that was the week before Christmas. And again, that's not very festive, but that was like a Boxing Day release here, which I enjoyed. Nice to have Michael Mann back. Seems to have split people, that one. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but...
Didn't catch that one, no. I think that one has the weird thing as well of where I saw it, the poster and everything. I thought, okay, yeah, like biopic kind of true life film, getting ready for Oscar season. But then sometimes when you see the posters with Sky Original on it, I'm always like, ooh, like that seems to be a new thing now with like Beekeeper and things like that, in which I'm like, oh, I'm not sure how to feel about this in terms of whether they are just up in their game as like a sort of financial backer, or whether I should see these films as Sky Originals and so aren't very good.
It's a weird one, because May, December was Netflix in the US. And that, hence their, big awards push, which they've got a few Oscar noms. And then Ferrari, I think, got a wide release. I don't know if it's a streaming one in the US. So both had like proper partners there, and then they just get lumped in as Sky films here. Like weirdly, all of Steven Soderbergh's films now go straight to Sky, and that's like a proper director you'd think would be like in cinemas. Like Kimmy was here, No Sudden Move, and then Magic Mike. So I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned the awards season, so I guess you're getting prepped now for the Oscars in terms of like writing and just generally being a fan of movies. And as you mentioned before recording, the BAFTAs have just gone. So any particular thoughts on those or the awards coming up?
Yeah, I think, and speaking to other journalists about this, I think it's one of the strongest awards for seasons and years, because I think there's genuinely high, there's a high quality threshold across all the films, to be honest. Anatomy of a Fall, Zone of Interest, Poor Things, Past Lives, these are all excellent films. And I feel like there's not one that's going to be like a Green Book or a Vice or something like that, where in a couple of years people go, oh, did we really nominate that for Best Picture? Don't Look Up was the other one. I think the only shame is that All of Us Strangers hasn't really got any love outside of the BAFTAs. And even Andrew Scott didn't get a nom there, which is, when everyone else did. That was a bit weird. The one I haven't seen is
people are reflecting badly on Vice.
Adam McGee.
I feel genuinely devastated to hear that.
I don't know. You get corners of the internet who really don't like that movie. But yeah, I think it's genuinely been a really exciting, season. And I like that obviously Oppenheimer did win quite a lot of BAFTAs, but outside of that, everything was kind of shared. Zone of Interest had a few, Holdover's got a few, Poor Things. So, there isn't like a sort of runaway train. And I don't know if Oppenheimer's going to win quite as many at the Oscars because there's a few categories where it's like, is Paul Giamatti going to, nip him to Best Actor and things like that?
And it just feels like more of a shared experience within film goers, I think, which is quite nice as well. You want that nice balance of like a film that, everyone agrees is awards worthy, but isn't just there because it's a kind of like it earned the most at the box office, which would also be the case for Barbie, I suppose, as well. So Oppenheimer and Barbie, they both did very well, but they both have like, credible directors behind them, had their success probably through the quality of their storytelling and their productions. So rather than like, an Avatar or Avatar 2 kind of like nomination, or years ago when the Oscars were saying they were going to have that kind of like popular film award and then quickly scrapped it, this feels like a nice way of saying that, we're still engaging with the general public because these are like billion-dollar films. So everyone did enjoy them. So people can watch this or see the end result and be like, oh yeah, I have seen potentially, the best film in the Oscars eyes of the year, depending on what wins. But, I think that's a great aspect as well, is there's a good variety.
I think the inclusion of both films is really good because I feel like in recent years, because the numbers have dropped off, the Oscars, because maybe like the big blockbuster films haven't been nominated. So having, 2 or 3 that have done really well means there's going to be that audience interaction because people are like, oh, I saw Barbie, I saw Oppenheimer, and, even some of the other films like Poor Things, I think has done pretty well. Killers of the Flower Moon did, for a film of its type, did well box office as well. So, there'll be that audience interaction, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's should be, definitely going to be quite a tough contest, I think, on the night. So that'll be interesting to see how it all goes.
So in last episode, we were watching the film Stepmom, a film that, why did I say it like an American? Whatever, it's an American film. We were covering the film Stepmom, a film that made one of our previous guests both laugh and cry. So our end game was focusing on the funniest reasons that have made people cry about certain films. It was Mary versus Steph. Steph was the winner, but chose Mary's choice, as she seems to have that power to influence a lot of people in that particular way. And this time, basically following her admitted lust towards Ed Harris, specifically his hands, we went for the 2005 film History of Violence. So for those who don't know the story, this is the story of Tom Stall, a well-respected man who leads a quiet, charmed life with his loving wife and family in a small town. But when he kills a robber in self-defense at the diner in which he runs, he is lauded by the national media as a vigilante hero. Unfortunately, the media spotlight also brings him to the attention of some crazy, sleazy criminals who recognize Tom as a former associate. Now, to protect his family, Tom must confront his secret history of violence. That is the genuine description on YouTube as I watch this film. So, as already mentioned, this is directed by David Cronenberg. Obviously not within his usual wheelhouse. He's much more known for sort of weird body horror-esque sort of films such as like The Fly, Crash, Dead Ringers, even to the point of even in popular culture, anytime like somebody becomes deformed, it's being described as like a Cronenberg sort of creature. Obviously, the most popular example of that is in, say, Rick and Morty, where there's an entire world of Cronenbergs. So writing credits for this one, this was written by Josh Olson, but original writers credits going to John Wagner, I don't know if the guy is German, and Vince Locke, because obviously this is based on pre-existing work. This was edited by Ronald Sanders, cinematography by Peter Zazinski, and composer Howard Shaw. In the cast, we have, as Tom Stall, we have Viggo Mortensen, or Joey Cusack, as in the other character name because of the potential identity. Obviously, we know Viggo Mortensen from Lord of the Rings, and already mentioned on this podcast, The Green Book, a film that David forgot that he was in before going into this. Then also in the cast, we have Maria Bello as Eddie Stall. We have Ed Harris as Carl Fogarty. We've obviously covered him last time. Interestingly, with the Oscar nomination for this role, we have William Hurt as Richie Cusack. We have Aston Holmes as Jack Stall. And finally, we also have Peter McNeil as Sheriff Sam Carney as the notable cast for this film.
Right. Well, let's talk all about A History of Violence then from 2005 and ask the question of whether it deserves the honour of a place in our movie vault, our vault that encapsulates memorable movies for all time. So, as I mentioned, this is from 2005, so let's first look at the year the film came out.
Oh, here we go.
To give us an idea of the time period it was made. And
Get ready for him to talk about Hurricane Katrina, everyone.
No, thankfully, I'm just keeping it to pop culture this time,
Oh,
even though
okay.
there was a lot of tragedy in that year. I don't think it's reflective of the film or its context as to why it was made like other ones. But yeah,
He's learning.
Hey, I'm saying that I thought other films were relevant. So yeah, 2005, the video sharing website YouTube was founded, where Craig has said that he watched this film. Yeah, so feel old yet, guys? So yeah, it was created by Chad Hurley, Steve Chen, and Jawed Karim. And they were three creators, which were all former PayPal employees, and came up with the idea for the concept. Quite funny as well, because last time we talked about how Google was founded as well, and obviously YouTube is a part of Google now as well. Popular films of this year were Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, Chronicles of Narnia, War of the Worlds, King Kong, Madagascar, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Batman Begins, Hitch, Crash, Brokeback Mountain, Capote, and Walk the Line. So quite a lot of big franchise fare there, but also some franchises which have come back into public consciousness in this year. Mr. and Mrs. Smith now having a series, and also other films which I guess kind of share some DNA with this film in terms of like Capote, etc. And then if you look at music, you had the likes of Mariah Carey, Green Day, 50 Cent, Kelly Clarkson, Black Eyed Peas, Rascal Flatts, Coldplay, Killers, and Keith Urban, which is definitely there to represent some of the popular music in America at the time.
Thank you for specifying America.
So yeah, as we mentioned before, the time period is very relevant in terms of the type of film this is, as Chris decided on, and Craig mentioned it there as well, is this is not within the typical wheelhouse of Cronenberg. So obviously, as we mentioned, we got two Chris's here, so I'll specify which one I'm talking to by surname. So Chris C, for you, what do you think of, like, when you think of this time period of like 2005, and when you watch this, without giving your opinions of the film yet, what sort of other films do you think are so similar or of that type?
For me, it was the first exposure to Nolan, really, because he had that was a big era for him. You had Batman Begins and then The Prestige just after, and you'd had Insomnia and Memento. So for me, that's four of his strongest films. All came out, by the mid 2000s. King Kong, you said, I got fond memories of that one. Loved Peter Jackson. Walk the Line as well. I like that one. So I think it's quite a solid era for, and I think going back to what we were saying about awards, I think that was one of the periods when awards films generally perform well at the box office, because I think Walk the Line for a while was the highest grossing biopic, and I think generally, Brokeback Mountain and things did well too. So yeah, it's mad it's nearly 20 years old as well, this era we're talking about.
Hella depressing.
That is, yeah.
But yeah, I think what you said there in terms of that time period of like Nolan is quite a good example as well, because when you think of those early films, Memento, etc., it's more of that kind of like smaller scale, more independent filmmaker aspect to it, which I guess this has an element to, in the sense of it's a scaled down film, but then you also have some sort of more big production values in terms of like the composer and some of the stars of this film. So I guess at this time, like with Crash and things like that, there's more of that amalgamation of like the two worlds colliding a bit more, which I guess now you don't have as much either. When you look at what people would say is like the biggest films of the year, we were just talking about like the Oscars. I think that you could look at something like Oppenheimer and say, yes, even though that is still, a director-led artistic vision, it still feels like a big scale kind of large movie. And if you looked at the most popular films of the year, if you look at things like other Oscar winners like Everything Everywhere All at Once, they still have this kind of prestige and sort of scale to them, which has kind of like changed how, maybe smaller films don't sort of get that, that bigger kind of platform to stand on. I guess something like this would be more akin to like a streaming service now, potentially. I don't know if that's controversial, but
because you've had like The Killer on Netflix last year, and this tonally maybe feels, and David Fincher obviously was making thrillers in the mid 2000s as well. It's probably similar tonally to something like that, I guess, and it probably would get a Netflix release now,
Yeah. Chris Maxwell, you obviously alluded to earlier about feeling it very much was like a mid or noughties film. Looking at the time period as well, do you think, as you mentioned before, that it has a lot of DNA within, the sort of bleakness at that time, or maybe the types of directors and filmmakers which were emerging at that time as well?
Yeah, it's funny because 2005, I sort of think like the films that came out, and then you were just listing off some then, and I've just sort of thought about it that there was so much that came out at that time that just doesn't feel like it's 2005. You mentioned there's a Batman Begins and a Prestige, but then you've also got like things like V for Vendetta came out, and Serenity, and like you got some mad things like all these different sort of films. Like Domino was one of those films that came out. So it was like one of those sort of action romps that sort of just happened in the middle of the sort of the 2000s. Then you got films like Green Street and films like Hard Candy and Brick. Like it's such a diverse year of film, and a lot of these are films that was sort of when I was discovering in the mid 2000s that was really changing my perception of cinema. And it's weird.
I think there's a bigger disparity also, sorry to cut in, but I think that, like, as you mentioned, though, those blockbusters, I was thinking when I was reading them off, like, Star Wars, Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter, it's like as if those and then the kind of more realistic films, not to say that like they were all independents or anything, but it's just like this huge gulf. Like it feels like the summer movies and then like everything else. Like whereas like now it seems like they blend in a bit more, like I said with Oppenheimer or even Barbie, etc.
That's exactly it. Like it's so weird to think that all these films came out in the same year. Like they almost have an identity so big that they almost feel like they were in completely different years in a way. And that's not to say that these are like groundbreaking, amazing films, but maybe it just says something to the way that we like cinema's marketed these days. You talked about the idea of like streaming and how like I look at some of the films that came out in 2005. I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of them had just if streaming had existed, would have just been plunked on that. Like this one, definitely, this feels absolutely like a Netflix original or some sort of a streaming film. And it's not to disparage it, but it just feels like there's now such a big gap between the streaming films and the Hollywood cinema movies, And then of course there's the big blockbusters, the action blockbusters somewhere in between that. And like in terms of like of its time, I think a big reason this film feels very much in its time. It's less than 2 hours. This is a sub 2 hour film, but it felt pretty packed. Like that runtime doesn't feel quick. There's a lot in it, and I think nowadays you'd be hard pressed to find a movie less than 2 hours. I think if this film was made now, you're probably looking at 2.5 hours. And a lot of that would probably just be long shots. And this film's got a few long shots in it and lots of moments of silence.
That's what's interesting at this stage as well. I was saying to Craig before recording is that, we're starting to see trends within the films that come up, but also trends from people who suggest them as well. Like Mary definitely loves a kind of 90-minute film, which is kind of like a very sort of central characters, very intimate sort of storyline, and has like its sort of subtle themes and kind of like, a dark underbelly to it. The fact that she has like Frenzy and Neon Demon suggested in the past, this feels very similar to those in that sense as well, that it is like another hour-and-a-half film, with a sort of similar location. You can get a view very much of your taste, Mary, here with History of Violence.
And a one and done as well. Like this film there's no sequel, there's no sequel bait, there's no franchise bait. This was a film that was made because this was the story that this person wanted to tell, and it exists in it of itself, and it it's nice to sort of have a film that's like, this is the story. This is all the story I want to tell. It's this length. And you probably, maybe if you would ask him, there's probably stuff that was cut out, but there's no intention of this going any further. We're not going to learn more about, Joey Cusack or the background or the gangsters or any of that world. It's all contained, self-contained.
Yeah, I think I could definitely imagine in some way a film like this being made now and kind of having a character like this. Oh, this team up with John Wick and and Reacher and that kind of thing. It's almost as if it maybe wouldn't even become this kind of like sort of scaled down kind of intimate story. It would become like Taken almost, in which like, oh, let's make them more of a badass.
The story is very similar to Nobody, the Bob Odenkirk film.
Yeah.
Like the beats are almost identical, and then obviously that's franchised and from the John Wick guys. So
true.
I was thinking Nobody and John Wick kind of do the same kind of beats, but then they've obviously both become big things. So it kind of shows how, if the same thing can be approached as like a one and done, like self-contained thing versus something that's expanded into this. John Wick's like 4 films and spin-offs and TV shows now. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And Chris Connor, do you think? Are you much of a Cronenberg guy yourself?
Weirdly, the only other Cronenberg I've seen is one that is really connected to this one is Eastern Promises, because that's another thriller and that has Viggo Mortensen in it as well, and that came out like a year or two after this one. So obviously they're quite a good, probably like companion viewing. And again, it's like 90 minutes or 100 minutes. So he obviously went through a period of just doing thrillers in the mid 2000s.
Yeah,
but he's one, a bit of a blind spot. I'd like to watch, the like iconic body horror ones, Crash, The Fly, that you guys have mentioned, but just not got around to it yet.
Yeah, exactly. Chris Maxwell, what about yourself?
Yeah, I like a lot of Cronenberg's works, particularly the stuff from the 80s, things like Videodrome, Scanners. I love The Fly. And like, there's still some ones I want to watch. Like, I want to finish watching Dead Ringers. And like, yeah, he's got his background's very much in that body horror style, and like a lot of his films were sort of that teetering on horror thriller. That was his sort of style. This is why this one stands out so much. And yeah, it makes sense that this wasn't written by him in a sense, because it's very different to like his Videodrome style movies, which all have a sort of psychedelic feel to them. He always had a sort of uncertainty to his films. There was always something very strange going on. In fact, I think one of the most, aside from the violence in this movie, one of the most Cronenberg things about this film, I'd say, is the ending. Just a very strange ending. A good ending. I like the ending of this film, but yeah, that felt very Cronenberg to me.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit similar to our conversation about Peter Jackson. When we were talking about Brain Dead, we were talking about him as a kind of like more niche weirdo director before going into like massive big blockbuster productions, and not that Cronenberg has gone down that route, but when you hear about then his more body horror stuff, that's similar in terms of like what Jackson was doing back in like the 80s and stuff as well. And yeah, The Fly is definitely one that has been on my radar for a long time, wanting to see that because of like how famous it is within pop culture. But as Craig mentioned, with his infamy, through things like Rick and Morty, I think that is the main way I know him, is just through his name and just like what he is known for and those big projects. So yeah, going into this, I didn't sort of have much major expectations for him as a director.
Guys, I'll level with you. I was kind of bored by this. I don't want to just sort of hate on it, because I don't think it's a film worthy of just hating. Like, there's nothing really wrong with this film. It's just I don't know. I think I was just sort of underwhelmed, because I think that it's ironic, because when Maxwell was saying earlier about the if this were made in this day and age, was it Chris Maxwell who said this? Was it Chris Connor?
Yeah, I think it was me. I think Chris.
I should have just said Chris.
They're becoming one.
You could have been saying
no. Basically saying about like if it were made in this day and age, it'd be like over 2 hours. I think it was you, Maxwell, right?
Yeah, it was me. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I got that right there.
Chris Connor's just going to put on a black hat at some point and just going to blow Craig's mind.
Oh no, it's when I have to do the scoring for the end game later. It's going to be a nightmare.
We'll use pseudonyms like Joey Cusack. That's what we should do.
Yeah, true. No, but when you were saying that, when you were saying that the film, like, if it were made in this day, it would be like closer to like 2.5 hours. There was a small part of me that just thinking that the elements of the film that on paper I would like. So I like the nature of the story. I like the idea of the fact it seems to be building up like an aspect of this mystery. Like, is this actually Joey, or is this like some weird sort of conspiracy? I felt like there just needed to actually be more instances in which these things sort of played out. I think that the fact that it's sort of not crammed together, but the fact that the film knows that it needs to like have moments to sort of let these things linger, but then doesn't try to break them up. It just seems to like moment linger. It just meant that I just wasn't thrilled. Like, I thought that the first set of gangsters were sort of taken out of the picture way too quickly compared to like their inception. Or what do? They go and see him in the diner. They drive past him. They freak out the daughter, and then they just go like, okay, yeah, we're just picking up the son. It just doesn't feel like they do anything that menacing to actually drive up the tension significantly. I felt they needed to be, say, 1 or 2 more instances, with one of them being like a major instance before we then get to the sort of son, double both taking them out, etc. And then obviously the reveal of his identity and like the small fallout of that, and then actually going back to like his brother, etc. They're all ideas that I think work. It's just, I don't know, it just never gripped me specifically. I will say, like, I did try and make jokes of the film to try and like sort of entertain myself. The only things I could get to, sadly, the film made one of the jokes I was going to make about it for me. So I was like, oh, well, you've stolen that from me now, thanks. It's when the son just goes, oh, what do I call you now? And I just went, I'd assume dad. And then it went, well, you can call me dad. I was like, oh, yeah, he said it. And then the other one is, we don't solve our problems in this house by hitting people. No, we just shoot them. Hits his son. So I'm like, oh, fantastic. Good to see consistent moral messaging. But
that kind of reminded me of Stepmom from last time, in a way of like, bringing up like very on the nose lines, and especially like the whole like child reacting to parent of like, you don't walk out on your mother. She's like, no, that's your job. And then so it's like, this was like the 2005 Viggo Mortensen version of that with the you shoot them.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I think writers assume that teenagers are a lot smarter and wittier than they actually are. I think the majority of I don't know if it's just because I've lived in Britain, where the majority of comebacks is just like, shut up, you nonce, or but yeah, that's sort of my stance on this. I was just like, okay, this film is happening. I acknowledge the things happening. I think the second half of the film gets slightly weirder. I mean, like, I'm sure there'll be a moment where we talk about the awkward stare sex, but I was watching that all going on. I was like, why is this happening? But yeah, just I'm not gonna hate on this film because I don't think anything fundamentally wrong with this film. I was just not entertained.
Fair. Chris Connor, what do you think? Is this going to be a complete 360? Are you in agreement? Somewhere in the middle?
I really liked it. I mean, I kind of agree with the comment on the middle set of gangsters being kind of dealt with a bit too quickly. Because I was like, oh, this is going to go somewhere. And then suddenly they go as quickly as they showed up. But generally, I thought it was great. There's kind of, probably from the Howard Shore school, there's like this kind of tension throughout, because you obviously don't know like what's going to happen next. And I quite liked how sparing the action was, because it's called A History of Violence. We don't actually have that much violence in the film. There's maybe like 3 or 4 scenes of short, brief violence, and that's it. But it's more about kind of, how it just gets, stuck in people's history, and how, it's always going to catch up with you and things like that. I thought it was just, it's pretty intelligent. And there were a couple of bits where I was like, you could tell this is a Cronenberg, because I think it's in the diner when they break in and he shoots the guy in the head, and like half his face is suddenly like missing. Yeah. I was like, that's grim.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked
And
it.
the guy he like punches, like he uppercuts in his nose, because I had to like rewind that because I was like, is his nose now gone? I was like, cause I was looking at it, I was like, no, he just sort of like, breaks it and like shifts it. But then when he's on the floor, it almost looks like it's like off his face. It's just like, but I think it was just the angle in which it was at. But
Yeah, I really liked it. Yeah, comparing it to something like now, I feel like there'd have been a lot more action. It'd have been a lot more drawn out. So like John Wick,
yeah.
it's the same kind of plot, but there's just so much more action in it. And I feel like this is effective because there's less action and there's then more
Yeah.
tension between the family that other films might not have focused on. They could have gone like, oh, he's action man, he's going to take out 200 gangsters. Whereas this, he's like probably confronted with 7 guys in the whole film or something like that. Probably a bit more, but yeah, it just felt gritty, grounded, and yeah, I enjoyed it. Thought it was good.
Yeah, I was thinking during watching it, thinking if it was made now, how would that change the film for better or worse, in the sense of like imagining a film made now in which it would be this bonkers or kind of like gritty, kind of like violent final act in which like it's all or nothing, and like I need to protect my family, and they come away drenched in blood, and they've killed like 1,000,000 guys, and it's like this whole shootout or something like that. So I think part of me was like, I'm glad it isn't that, and it isn't just repetitive, because a lot of films you can see now do kind of feel formulaic in that sense, and you watch it thinking, I feel like I've seen this. But then there is also the side that Craig was saying, in which sometimes it does feel quite kind of underplayed and a bit, it's built in this grand scale, as you said, with the Howard Shore score, but doesn't always like hit then that kind of tension is trying to build up. For me, I think I liked this all fine. I wasn't so bowled over by it. I think that I was sort of on board with some of the decisions, some of the acting I thought was nice. There was some like interesting messaging throughout. But I was just a bit mixed on like the decision of just some of the narrative choices. I think that I liked its kind of like intimacy and that it wasn't too overblown. I like the sort of way that, Viggo Mortensen's character sort of like dips in and out of this character of like his previous version and his current sort of life. I quite like that. I think that it's an interesting angle to take in terms of looking at this like kind of small town family and how it's affecting them. And I think I kind of preferred the story in a way of like, how does a man who's just like kind of humble business owner who has to become this like violent hero, not so much like the fame side of things that, we've seen plenty of things like that, but how does that sort of violent act change him? I think I kind of like that idea, but in a way, for me, some of the tension was taken away by the entire title of the film, A History of Violence. I was like, there was a lot of this, like, are you this Joey? Have you done these horrible things? And even by the fact that he did, sort of spring into action so much at the diner, I was like, well, I'm pretty sure that this is all true and that we are just waiting for this, unveiling of the truth. So, and I think weirdly, usually I'm not one who's quite critical of like a choice of composer, but I felt that like Howard Shore was maybe the wrong choice for this. And I love Howard Shore, like his music for Lord of the Rings is fantastic. And I don't know if it's just because I've heard that so much, but I felt that, again, if I was looking at it through this 2024 lens, if this was made today, I don't think that Howard Shore or a composer like that would be chosen, because it felt like, again, this kind of 2005 tendency to kind of make it grand scale with some production elements, but still have it be quite low scale and indie. And I just didn't think that quite melded. I think you need to choose your lane. And I think when you've got like a big stir-in score and an orchestra, and there's moments in which like bring in the violins and there's all these violins when it's just a man in a field, I'm like, this would work fine with just a piano or just one violin. It's like, so I don't blame Howard Shore. I think it's like, he probably did what they kind of asked of him. But I just feel like it just needed to be scaled back. I just felt like it was too grand, too fantasy, like too sort of like epic for what was quite an intimate, smaller story. I didn't think it sort of serviced it that well. The ending, I think, like Chris, I do respect it and I do appreciate it, like the very, very end. But I did feel that the actual kind of final act, the sort of confrontation, was not as good as the kind of stuff with Ed Harris's character. I felt that maybe that should be the end of the film. I felt the stuff with his brother just kind of amounted to nothing, really. I didn't feel that there was all that much menace or payoff for any of that. So, yeah, I was quite mixed. I like the style of it. I like some of the performances. Like Craig, I thought some of the stuff with like the kids and stuff was a bit on the nose. I did like some of the sort of commentary and the representation it had there. But there was some odd choices, especially the fact that the film opened with these two criminals as if like you were going to follow them or that was going to be a bigger part. And then when I got to the end of the film, I was like, why were they introduced in that way when they just were sort of killed like 15 minutes later, you know, especially because that violent act wasn't all that much of a centerpiece of the film. But yeah, that's my sort of thoughts. Chris Maxwell, what do you think?
See, to be fair, I think all the things you guys have said are very fair points because like it's such an interesting sale of film. I think the sort of thing they were trying to go for with the idea was that this is all just a series of unfortunate events and there's no glamour to it. I think Chris Connor, you made a really good point about like there's very brief moments of violence, but they're very violent and they're very brutal. And then it's they like there's like punctured in really suddenly into this what feels like a very like it's like a family drama and like a life drama. And yeah, like it was, I think the problem is it's pretty obvious from the off that he's definitely this Joey Tucson. It's pretty obvious. But I think having just rewatched it then and I think a point that I think the film really needed to hammer home was the point that I think it is where it did fail. I think they needed to really hammer home that he didn't want to be this Joey Cusack anymore. Like he really didn't want to be, but everything just kept bringing him back to it. It's funny, those first two criminals, like that opening scene lingers on them so long and what they end up doing, but then they're just gone. And then that's the inciting incident to bring in Ed Harris's gang. And then by towards like nearly 2/3 in, he's gone, and then he finally goes and sees his brother because he did all these things just keep leading him back to him. And I think in the final scene, I think what they really, really needed was a moment of him to just be like, look, you don't understand. Even my family doesn't understand. I don't want this anymore. I'm trying my damnedest to move on. And I think that's what the film was missing. But the reason I liked that ending is that he does go home and then there's that awkward moment of the family all being like, oh, well, what now? And it does sort of end. But I think what we really needed was more of him really being like, no, I don't want to be this anymore. Because I think that's what the point of the film is. He desperately doesn't want to have this history of violence. And in a way, I think the film loses where the film makes mistakes is that like it introduces these characters and then they're gone. And then it introduces characters and then they're gone. It's got a bit of that Game of Thrones Walking Dead problem where it's like, oh, who could this? Oh, he's dead. Oh, but oh, he's dead. And even then, right at the end when he's with his brother, oh, he's dead. And I think that is, I think, a bit of a mark on it. I sort of get what they were going for, like that people will just die and it's over. But yeah, overall, I do still enjoy the film. I think it does have very effective. I think it's very effective use of violence and there's no glamorousness to it. And I like the fact that Tom or Joey, Viggo Mortensen's character, is so ruthless and dangerous. And when you see that version of him, particularly after the fight scene or the shootout in his own front garden, that's the moment where you properly see the real Joey. There's that real moment of like, oh, this guy's a fucking monster. Like he's absolutely dangerous. But it's nice that it's only glimpsed. There's some other, I think there's the moment where his son fights the bully. That's a really powerful moment because that's again, that's sort of, oh, is it really just him or is it something that's in his family? Is it in his DNA? And yeah, I know you touched on it as well earlier, Craig, the awkward stare sex scene. For years, I did look at it as like, this is such an odd, out of place moment, but it's weird having with the context of her lying to the police officer Sam, and the way she says "F you, Joey" to him on the stairs, I get the vibe that there's a part of her that's kind of into this.
Yeah.
And it sort of goes back to right at the beginning of the film where she's wearing the cheerleader costume. I think maybe there's a part, she's obviously doesn't, she's pissed off at it, but there's a part of it that used that on him. So that scene, for the first time probably since I've ever watched it, that scene actually kind of made a bit of sense to me. Yeah, I like the film. I think there are definitely some missed opportunities with it. And yeah, I do think I would have liked a better final confrontation with Richie. That's definitely a big thing that I would have liked.
Yeah, I'm glad you said about the sun scene, because I thought that what it felt to me like that they sort of were building up, but then don't ever really give a major payoff to, which I think sort of feeds into the dynamic that you said should have happened with Tom, that he really doesn't want this violence, is that they needed to emphasize as well that he doesn't want the violence specifically because he doesn't want his family to get in on the violence as well, right? Like, he comes down hard on his son for beating up that bully and getting suspended purely because he was just like, look, violence is just not the answer here. But then obviously the son has to kill one of the mobsters in order for them to be fine. And then nothing is said of this ever again. Like, I thought they were building up to the idea of the son now seeing like violence as a legitimate, you know, bringing it more in, and then there has to be like some like final, you know, breakdown of why violence isn't the answer. You know, some moment where sort of Tom emotionally breaks down. This is like, it's, you know, this is what violence does to you as a person. These are the sort of things that it turns you into. This is why you can't follow the same path as me. This is why you can't have the same history as me. Hence, history of violence. Which is why I thought, oh, maybe it could be about like just that dynamic instead of just, lol, you that guy I know. Yeah, you are. Cool.
Yeah, that's why I thought that potentially with the two guys at the beginning, that's where the connection was going to be, that they were like a part of this gang, or that there was some sort of bigger organized string, you know, like a string of crimes, or like a bigger organization which were kind of going around and, I don't know, robbing banks in small towns or something like that, or which were just psychos. But, you know, and I thought that maybe that was the connection, that they were like, you've killed one of our guys. And again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about last time with Stepmom. It's like, choose a lane, you know. It's like, you know, I think if it's going to be small town guy who has to become hero and has to sort of become this violent man, which he doesn't want to be, I think in some ways, I think that's a more interesting story and more fascinating to explore, especially for what they've already established in terms of the family has very much a kind of like different approach to violence and how to like disperse the situation, as we see with the son. You know, he kind of disperses the situation with the bully in the locker room in a very clever way by sort of like using his smarts against, you know, the bully. And, you know, I think that then that I think would have then worked better for then how you were saying, Chris, maybe of like, you know, him not wanting to have this, you know, that sort of resistance on the character. I think you could have gone down that line. It could have been that like the whole reason that these gangsters come in is because they were connected to the original criminals, which is why you see them at the beginning. And it's just about this man's sort of resistance to become the violent character, or even the hero maybe that the sort of media in the town is sort of coaxed him into be. And maybe sort of the final confrontation could have been more about the town, about him protecting other people, something like that.
See, if it went into that, I think that would be going into the trope of just like, oh, this just seems to be going too grand.
Yeah.
If it's like, we have to protect the town from anarchy.
Yes, yeah, I can get that.
If I may, there's one thing that I definitely would have done. I would have just made Ed Harris his brother. I think that would have been much more effective, because then he's now a family member too.
It is, like you said, Game of Thrones, it would be the Hound and...
the Hound in the Mountain, yeah.
That would have made the more realistic, because I think the problem with the scene at him being like, oh, we just want to go for a drive, I almost feel like, it's like, why do you want to take him for a drive? You could just kill him. Don't you want to kill him? I feel like if they had made, and that's no disrespect to
William Hurt.
William Hurt, yeah, because I think he was great.
Oscar nominee for this role, William Hurt. Oh, wow. That's what I did say earlier. I'm surprised nobody reacted.
Which, by the way, yeah, I should touch on that. that's mental. And he did a great role, but it's so brief that he got an Oscar nomination for that. That's pretty mental, to be honest with you. But I almost feel like it may have made things more effective if Ed Harris had been his brother, he'd been Richie, and they'd had
Well,
a big falling out.
It certainly adds to the dynamic of him denying his identity, right?
Yeah.
Like after a while, when even the wife is just going, "He's not this guy." He's like, "Yes, he is. He's my brother." It might be, quite sort of soap opera-esque sort of reveal, but I think it adds another level of like tension.
Sometimes Oscar nominations, as probably you would see, Chris Connor as well, in terms of when we're talking about BAFTAs and Oscars, sometimes it can be kind of like there for the career of somebody, or even just for one specific scene or something as well. Like here, I felt that like the introduction, well, obviously in some ways he only really has one scene, but
he only has this scene.
Yeah, but like just specifically like his introduction, like the sort of like way they embrace each other, etc. I don't know if like there even people sort of like were very drawn in by that and were kind of like liked his sort of confidence and his kind of like cockiness, and they were just alone in that. Were like, yeah, this deserves nomination just for that.
It's
possibly.
a really random one. Needed to check who he was up against.
Yeah,
it must be one of the shortest noms in terms of screen time.
Yeah, that's true.
We have George Clooney for Syriana, won that. Jake Gyllenhaal for Brokeback Mountain. Paul Giamatti for Cinderella Man, and Matt Dillon for Crouch Jesus. So there's not the highest threshold quality-wise there.
But compared to screen time, yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal will definitely have a lot more over him in terms of
but yeah, I think
screen time.
All the other nominees are probably in, a good chunk of their films, not just one scene. Yes. Yeah, I mean, he won an Oscar as well, William Hurt. So what you were saying about it being for the career is weird because he'd already got one. But I can't really justify why he got nominated. And I think if anyone deserved the performance, for me, is it Mario Bello?
Yeah.
I think she probably gets the most kind of work to do. Because she kind of goes through the emotions of, the sort of structure of their relationship. And yeah, I just think she probably has the showiest performance in the film. And obviously Viggo as well. And Viggo did get a nom for Eastern Promises, which is obviously his other collaboration with Cronenberg. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought was interesting, as I said, because, again, like being this kind of like time in which you would get like Lord of the Rings, he is coming off of that. Howard Shore is coming off of that. So again, was that a kind of reason as to, putting those two in there, and it kind of distracts in some ways with the Howard Shore part, which I was talking about. But yeah, I think also, to go back to what I was saying about, the choosing the lane, I think it's equally, I think Craig is right, is that, yeah, it could lead to a very chaotic, crazy ending, which you wouldn't want. So alternatively, it's like, do you just go all in on this, like, other life he wants to escape aspect, and then through that, just take out all the stuff with, like, maybe the son and these other criminals, and just purely focus on him trying to escape that life constantly, and that being maybe through the other suggestions you had, Chris, there about, like simplifying things with the brother, etc. I think that, yeah, it just seemed that like it wanted to tell both, in which it was like he's this simple countryman who doesn't want to like resort to violence, but then he is also this like very violent man who has like a very like bad history of violence, and we don't really know as to why, and we're just told a lot of the time like, oh, you did some crazy stuff. And it'd be like nice to see why he left that behind, or how that's creeping in more. And I think you did get elements of that. And yeah, there's definitely the stair sex scene, which also sounds like they're staring at each other, but the staircase. I think that is, yeah, definitely an interesting commentary there on the kind of like attraction to a bad guy, and something there that is referring, like you said, Chris, to earlier with the cheerleader scene, in which she says, like, oh, you bad boy, or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that, I was watching it thinking, oh, which way are we going here? Are we going for like a potential like assault scene here? Or is this kind of going to be what it turned into, which was then kind of like given into it? Because again, there seems to be some kind of like lure and attraction to it. But obviously, regardless of sex, she's kind of still pissed off with him essentially. And I think that that's what's interesting about the ending. That does tie in nicely with that kind of stuff, is that like, yeah, this is our life now, and I'm still not happy with you. And, the lies that you've told, but these are the demons that we have to live with, and potentially that would still be an element of their relationship. Is that kind of like giving into sin, which is something that he is doing in a way, is like giving into like the kind of like violent tendencies that he's previously had, and that's what she's bringing through in that, you know, sex scene that they have. But
I'm not sure if I would agree with the interpretation of he's giving in to the violent tendencies. It does seem very much he only does it at the point where literally everyone forces his hands.
Yeah.
Well, I would say in terms of when he does, though, it's like very elaborate and, you know, kind of like violent. He's not doing it in a kind of like restrained kind of like, I'm trying to keep as many people unharmed as possible.
No, but sometimes
the only way in which Jackie Chan style sometimes.
Yeah, but
like,
sometimes
you know,
the only way in which you are able to minimize that is by being as like, let's face it, as sophisticated as he effectively is, right? Especially in situations where, say, you know, people are holding guns to various people's head. Yeah. You kind of do have to like work in a certain amount of speed and aggression to be able to get the kills effectively so that nobody else does get harmed. So I think he is actually being restrained because otherwise he would just continue. If he were just literally lashing out, he would just continue attacking anyone who comes near him. I think at the point where like the threat is over, he just immediately stops. So I do think it's actually quite restrained.
Yeah, I guess it's more just in between, like I said.
But also I just see it like a mode, right? Like,
yeah.
At the point where you can control like going in and out of the mode, but then just whatever happens in that mode is just like over the top and elaborate, right? Yeah. I see it a little bit like a Jekyll and Hyde situation. Which is
what, again, why I wish they would choose that lane then, if they're going for that, is to show more of like, you know, why he's escaped that life, as Chris said.
I agree with that. I'm just saying I don't agree with the interpretation of he's giving into sin.
Yeah, I think the film is. I think this is where the final scene with his brother does shine. And it's one point that I said when I was watching it with my partner. You realize in that moment that he's actually not the crazy brother. It's Richie.
Yeah.
He's the more dangerous brother and the more effective killer. But Richie's a psychopath. Richie's just happy to watch his brother die for the sake of the business and the greater good of the business and being a mafia guy. And in that moment, though, Richie fails to realize that Joey is a fucking killer, and that's why Joey wins in the end. But yeah, once he's done, he's like, I'm done. And then he goes home to his family, this broken man, because he's just had to go back and kill his brother, when all he actually wanted to do, he even says it to him, is he wants to make peace. I think what makes it so, and again, I think this is where I think the film could have shown a bit more. His wife's embracing the violence in him because she has that's brutal thing from the stairs. His son is embracing the violence by beating up his bully,
which I was fully on board with,
I gotta say, yes, yeah.
Yeah, that kid was being a dick, and there was no reason to do that. But it's that sort of thing of like, there's this poor man desperate to get away from all this, and yet for some reason people are attracted to that, and in order for him to really fully get rid of that, in hopes that maybe just no one will come after him anymore, he has to kill his own brother. And that's a really tragic moment that I think, for me, this is kind of why there's a part of me being like, I kind of wish Ed Harris, maybe even Richie, they'd all been brothers. If they'd all been part of this crime family and they'd all fractured, and as a result, Joey left, Richie moved up, and his character just sort of floats around doing small crime, and in the end,
Carl was his name.
So yeah, I almost feel like had they all been connected, because I know the connection was that they were rival gangsters, but it almost feels a bit incidental towards the end of the film.
But it is still, you know, as we said, a fine film, but I feel like, yeah, maybe it is missing something. And I feel maybe that's like a villain who's in it all the way through. So maybe like Ed Harris being a brother, because we have these guys at the start, then we have Ed Harris and the other guy in the middle, and then we have his brother at the end. But there's no one who's kind of there all the way through. And I feel like it loses momentum because we're constantly being introduced to new people who were then dispatched quite easily. Like there's no real sort of sense of threat that perhaps there should be.
Okay, take those cassettes, rewind them, and play them again, because it's time for VHS Corner. So, what I'm going to do to start with, because obviously this is a very serious, very sort of, as we've described it, gritty, grounded sort of film. I'm just going to destroy that with the very first fact. And this is the first fact. This is the first time that I've come across a fact for a film, not specifically from IMDb, but from a YouTube short that came up immediately after I watched the film. Which is that during the first diner scene where Tom meets Carl and the other guy, basically that scene where they meet and have the sort of confrontation about like Joey, etc., etc. Viggo Mortensen could not stop laughing throughout all of the takes, so it became incredibly hard to sort of shoot. They had to re-record it several times. It got to the point that as well, Ed Harris, his character, was sat down for so long that in the end, he just did the scene in his pants, aka his underwear. Like he's just literally sat there because of how Viggo Mortensen was behaving. That's why you just do not see his legs. It's very intensely focused on his upper half in those shots. But yeah, he's just sat there without any trousers on. And those are the shots that they actually use in the film itself. So in those scenes where it's like quite tense, it's just like, you know, I'm not this Joey. It's like, yeah, all right then, Tom, etc. Yeah, he's basically just bottom half close to naked. Bit weird. But now on to actual nudity with the stair scene. So it's good to know that Cronenberg was a bit concerned about this scene because he didn't want any of the actors involved to be hurt because obviously, you know, staircases, not well known for the body to, you know, rest on. So he actually did contact his stuntman to ask if they had any pads to be able to soften the stairs. The reaction of the stuntman was to basically laugh. The reaction he got was just laughter. He said, in 20 years of doing this job, no one has ever asked me to have pads for a sex scene. So in the end, they weren't used for most of the scene. However, the next scenes after this show the ramifications of this, which is that when you can see the character Eddie naked in bed, there are several bruises on her back, many more of which had to be covered up by makeup. So if you really want to embody the history of violence, that is one way you have it there. This is the part where I usually talk about casting, and I like to talk about the people who weren't in this film. Sadly, there weren't many of those instances. I know that Harrison Ford was one of the people who was up for the role, but then for various reasons didn't get it. However, this is the part where I want to talk about how Cronenberg didn't really seem to trust the actors he actually had to do the backgrounds of the characters that he wanted justice. Because originally, the mobsters were meant to be Italian Americans, you know, living up that stereotype. But in the actual film, they are Irish American. Because obviously you have, the surnames basically connote it, right? So this is because once Viggo Mortensen, Ed Harris, and William Hurt were all cast, he didn't think they would make convincing Italian Americans. Which is obviously funny given the fact that Viggo Mortensen goes on 13 years later to appear in Green Book as an Italian American. And people thought he did a very convincing job, given he was nominated for an Oscar as an Italian American. As like one of my favorite lines of that film only works because he's Italian American. The entire Lake Titicaca scene. I don't know why I'm directing that at David. He doesn't remember the film. So, according to Bart Beatty in a book called David Cronenberg's A History of Violence, Cronenberg didn't know that this movie was based on a Paradox Press / Vertigo Comics graphic novel until after he signed on to direct. This is a bit of a problem because he has stated that he does not care for superhero films or comics, feeling that they are all adolescent at their core, no matter how dark, edgy, or intelligent critics and fans alike feel that they are. But thankfully, the comic is not a superhero comic, as with most books published by Vertigo, so he's able to do it. That probably also is where he gets some poetic license to do some of the more graphic body scenes, like with the face coming off, etc. because of that background. But yeah, quite funny that you don't actually do the research into what it is that you're adapting. And finally, and I think this is only fitting for the segment, but the film was released for home viewing in 2006 on VHS, widely believed to be the last major instance of a film being released in VHS format. So what better fact to talk about to finish off VHS Corner?
Perfect. But that's possibly one of my favorite ever facts, just because of the synergy there.
Yeah.
YouTube started and VHS ended. It's the circle of life.
YouTube killed the video star.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Chris Connor, any major sort of standouts there apart from the death of VHS in those facts?
The Harrison Ford one's interesting.
Yeah.
Because he's quite a lot older than Viggo. I want to say like a good maybe 15 years. So would the character have been, would the like familial situation have been different because he'd have been in his 60s when this came out, I guess. So is it believable to have him like with really young kids? I don't know.
I think they would have pulled off more of the kind of sort of
checkered past.
And the sort of hardened kind of grisly country guy angle as well. I think the like hide in that, because I think Viggo Mortensen comes across as an actual like really nice, genuine guy, which is like the good mask that he puts on. But then when he kind of goes into Joey more, you're like, oh, I don't know if I want you to kind of be more like this Jekyll and Hyde in terms of like do something crazy. Like he goes into like a kind of New York or Philadelphia accent more when he goes into it more, play it very, very differently. I think Harrison Ford would have had more of that kind of like element of like, this is my past and I didn't want to bring it up and, that kind of thing. But at the same time, I wouldn't have also wanted to see Harrison Ford I wouldn't have wanted to see Harrison Ford's ass on a staircase.
That's true.
Having sex with his wife.
To be fair, I think it would work insofar as that I think with the kids, given that he's like definitely sort of mid-teenage age, high school, etc. He could pull off being like, conceived when he was in his 40s sort of era.
Yeah.
And then basically just has to play late 50 as opposed to early 60.
Yeah, age up the daughter. Maybe.
Age up the daughter slightly. But then, I think it would be especially quite... I'm going to use a phrase I used earlier, but adapt it. Noncy, to see him having sex with his wife dressed as a cheerleader.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well that it's based off a graphic novel, because in some ways I can see that those sensibilities and just the kind of rhythm of the story, and the end again is almost comic book-esque in the type of framing and that idea of like, and now the last segment in which the hero faces the villain, and it's kind of like these kind of frame by frame sort of moments of like the fight in the office and then the fight outside. But it reminded me, this film, of The Road to Perdition as well, in terms of again that kind of like being forced into like a checkered sort of past, protecting your family, people sort of dying around you, and I think that is in my mind the sort of better film, which that is famously adapted from sort of like a graphic novel comic series as well. So didn't know that this was, but I can see how that was again a kind of a theme, a trend at that time. As Chris mentioned earlier as well, it's V for Vendetta was out this year in terms of having more sort of dark, gritty stories.
The other thing you talked about with like Ed Harris being in his pants, it's really, really funny. Have you ever seen the famous press conference about this film with Ed Harris?
No.
There's a famous bit Ed Harris did in promoting the movie where he's asked the question, what is violence? And he basically proceeds to just start slamming his hand on the panel desk, flinging his pen around, being very aggressive, being like, that's violence. That's violence. That's what the movie's about. And he's never really addressed it or talked about it. But it's been this very notorious piece of Ed Harris history that people are like, well, why did he do that? Why did he act that way?
We are creating like an Ed Harris timeline now of being like, was he attractive during the late 90s with his hands? And then like, why did he do that at this weird press conference?
What is that? What is that? No?
It sounds like the kind of chaos Craig would kind of appreciate in a way.
Slightly. I'm just more thinking, do we dare let Mary know about that scene? Because like she might just be like, no, don't hit your hands.
Loving the Scottish accent.
I don't know why I did the Scottish accent then. I don't think I meant to. I think it's just
where my throat is a little bit sore at the moment. I think it just sort of morphed.
More
To
impressions.
be clear, Mary, I know you're going to be listening. That is not how I think you sound.
I do, however, think that's how you would react to watching this scene.
We talk about things being memorable then, so we'll now get to our section, which is the movie vault. So for anyone new to the podcast, we'd like to think of this as our time capsule of memorable movies for someone to dig up in the future. So should A History of Violence from 2005 gain the honor of a place in our movie vault and be remembered for all time? So I'll go to Chris Maxwell first, as somebody who's got a lot of experience vouching for movies and sometimes just saying, nah. What do you think about A History of Violence going into the movie vault?
So like I said, I did like this film. I do think that there were some missed opportunities with it. I kind of want to now go and read the graphic novel. And
then repeatedly slam a desk after you've read it, like, that was A History of Violence. That was...
I think what this film does capture in terms of the idea of a history of violence and the idea of what violence is it's not glamorized. It's not like what they do with these badass, he's got a dark past characters, which is now the new trope, the sort of badass ultra violent heroes, which is the sort of new trope. Now this film is not nice, it's not pleasant, and the violence is very effective because of that. But I don't think this is a perfect film. I think there were certain missed opportunities with it. I appreciate it for the fact that they made it and it's a one and done. And I do actually think the performances are really good. I do, and I do enjoy it. I think it's a decent film. Do I think it belongs in the vault? No. Mostly because there's far better David Cronenberg movies out there. And I think there are better movies that tackle this sort of subject. I'm sure this idea of unglorious violence, this miserable sort of history that we have, and I think there are probably better versions of this out there. So sadly, I don't think this film should be in the vault.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with what you said there in terms of there being better examples, some of which have already been mentioned. I think, again, even though it's indicative of some elements of 2005, I think there are other examples of that as well. Like you said, not so much representative of David Cronenberg's work. And yeah, I think while it is great that it's within 90 minutes, you always sort of welcome a film that doesn't sort of, it doesn't outstay its welcome. It sort of tells its story quite effectively within that time. But I think, yeah, there's just a bit too many sort of gaps. I don't want to say plot holes or anything, but there's just some slight missed opportunities, some sort of the sort of theming and kind of messages of it, I think could have been a bit more focused. I think it is very strong, very powerful by the end and at the beginning of what this is. But I think there's just some things which kind of muddy the waters slightly. And I think it could have been a bit stronger and a bit more powerful, using certain techniques to do that, whether it be through music, through other characters, through its setting. Chris Connor, I thought, you sort of looked shocked when Chris sort of said he didn't think it should go in. No. Do you disagree?
I mean, I would have said yes, but I think on the things we've discussed here, it shifted my opinion slightly. I think no as well. I mean, I do like it, probably slightly more than you guys, but I think the kind of inconsistent holes with it kind of holds it back from being a great. I think the potential's there and it gets close, but there's just something, a few things missing for it to be really, stand out.
What do you think originally would have made you say yes before all this conversation?
Well, I just think I hadn't really figured out, Ed Harris's stuff before, about them not being, and then just on reflection thinking,
the fact he was in his pants, you were like, nah.
No, not that. It's more the lack of an overarching villain, I think. Which watching it, I didn't think, but then you sort of think back on things, you're like, actually, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's just a few small things. So I still liked it, and I'd watch it again. and I'm glad I watched it. But I think there's a few things that stop it from going in for me.
I would also point out as well, Chris, that you did say that you thought that Eastern Promises was a better film.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a pairing, they're quite interesting because obviously they're both Viggo Mortensen and Cronenberg, Howard Shore does both. So like as a pair, they're pretty good. But they kind of tackle completely different subjects because he plays a Russian hitman in Eastern Promises, and it's set in London. So like they're not that similar tonally, but they're both obviously about kind of criminal gangs and violence and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So hopefully we get to cover that in the podcast in the future. Craig, I assume you agree.
Look, I said that I was bored during this film. Like, I don't know why we think that this is going to have some profound impact on me later down the line. Look, if there are going to be better films that both represent like these sorts of themes, as well as work from this director, even the actors go on to do more memorable things, even though William Hurt, kind of glad you got an Oscar nomination, I guess. But yeah, like it's just not the sort of thing that I think is memorable enough for me to come back to, so I just don't think it'll go in.
Okay, so yeah, unfortunately, A History of Violence from 2005 does not go in the movie vault. Sorry again, Mary, that we weren't on board.
It's a good film. It's just not good enough, and I think that's the best way I could say it. It's not a bad movie, and like David said, it's not full of plot holes, but I think upon reflection, it's a film that leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, it's not a film that inspires hate in the reaction, so
We're in the end game now.
okay, endgame time. So we've had the history of violence, so this game is simply called The Real History of Violence. Obviously, there are lots of true crime drama films out there that follow like the stories of various murderers, various criminals, various ne'er-do-wells, we should say. And I thought it would be interesting if I could see how many of them were memorable enough to you guys that I can simply just say the name of the person who has inspired the film, that you can give me the film name itself. That's basically what the game is this time. I'm going to say the story of X, and then I want you to tell me who that is about. Clear enough rules?
So who is it? Who's it based upon? Who is it about?
So I will say who that person is, and then you have to say what the film is.
Oh, okay. So flip it. Okay, anyways.
The first thing I need to clarify, because this is going to be fastest first, is how you guys are going to buzz in.
So,
Chris,
don't. What I want you to do is I want you to think of a one-syllable word that is in some way crime-related, and then basically shout that out as your buzzer. So, Chris Maxwell, your buzzer would be...
One syllable. Oh God. Crime related. Gun.
Cool. So we have Maxwell is gun, and then Chris Connor.
Oh, gun's what I was going to go for. Don't know. Knife. But is that that's a longer word?
Sure.
That's a longer word. But okay, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's still one syllable, right?
Yeah.
So
let's go knife then.
Cool. So we have the classic fair fight of gun versus knife. But as always, we need to find out what it is that we'll be playing for. So this will determine the film that we'll be joining again once we've concluded our 100 episode specials. So we will be talking about whatever film is chosen, but not for a while just yet. So all of us have a suggestion, and we're just going to go through and just listen to little brief summaries and sort of snippets of what we could be in store for if your film is chosen. So, Chris Maxwell, tell us a little bit about your choice.
My choice is a Cronenberg film, and it is a tragic love story of change, greed, and also a lot of body horror.
Okay, interesting. David, tell us about yours.
So my film, The Connection, is mainly looking again at the title with history of violence. So that got me thinking, okay, well, if we look at history, when has there been a lot of violence? So I'm once again going for a war film, which I think we haven't discussed much on this podcast before. But I didn't want to sort of make it quite bleak and quite dark. So this is a sort of dark comedy, and definitely has an actor in it which sort of brings up the mood of any film. An actor which I'm surprised we've, again, never talked about. This film is from 1987, and I think looking at the history of violence, I think adds a lot of interesting looks at warfare, violence, and, you know, how you can sort of bring light and good commentary to that.
Okay, so we have David's Dark War film from then. Chris Connor, tell us a little bit about yours.
Yeah, so mine's from Peter Weir, Australian director. So it's from 1985, and it has Viggo Mortensen's first appearance as a very young actor. He's not a main part in it, and it's a detective investigating a crime in a rural Pennsylvania community, basically having to live with people in this community and kind of adapting. And it has Harrison Ford's only Oscar nomination for this film.
The two actors we talked about.
Yeah, so there's a couple of nice links to this one.
Okay, excellent. So we have the rural drama from 1985, and finally we have my suggestions. So I sort of have three reasons for this film that I want to put forward. So my film is from 1979, so the only film not from the 80s. In fact, not from 95, 96, or 97, as have been suggested by...
Did you say 95?
Sorry, 85, 86, 87. So yeah, the three reasons for my film suggestion. One, I feel that given the time of year that this film sort of covers, will coincide well with when this episode is eventually going to be released, whether that be before or after this particular event. I think it's just good timing to sort of talk about this film. Somewhat symbolic. Two, I feel that we've kind of gone down the sort of route of the emotions sort of being sort of sad feelings, sort of fearful feelings, just sort of a dark mood. And again, want to sort of like have like a dark edge, but in a very, very, very lighthearted way. So this is a sort of dark comedy in areas. And three, and this is the biggest link for me, the film that we just covered potentially was building up the suspense of, is this a case of mistaken identity, or is this the person that we're talking about? The film that I'm talking about is the biggest story ever of mistaken identity and people sort of buying into the idea of an individual as someone that they really aren't, and all of the things that can go with this. I think David sort of realized what my film is. That's my film choice. Will it be chosen? I don't know. It very much depends on who wins this game. So whoever wins, you can get your film choice, you can choose each other's choices, or you can choose one of mine or David's choices. So, we do need to play the game. Are we ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Number one. This is the story of Frank Sheeran.
Knife. Is it
Chris Connor?
the Irishman?
You are correct. It is The Irishman. Number two. This is the story of Sonny von Berlo.
Don't know this one.
No, I can't get it. No.
The name rings a bell, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So that was Reversal of Fortune.
Yeah.
How the Wheel of Fortune went bad. I'm obviously joking. Okay. Ready for number three?
Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
Cool. So for this one, we're going for the story of Truman Capote writing about the killing of the Clutter family.
Knife.
Chris Connor?
Is that is it Capote?
It is Capote.
Yeah.
You were slightly going to fall into
because
the
there's also
the name
In
of the
Cold
book,
Blood,
weren't
isn't
you?
there? Which is the book is based.
Yeah, that's the book that
yeah.
he is writing in the film Capote.
Oh, good. I've seen Capote quite recently, so I'm glad I got that.
And was listed in the films of 2005 as well.
Okay, number four. This is the story of John DuPont and the wrestling brothers Mark and Dave Schultz.
Gun.
Chris Maxwell?
Oh, God, no. I've literally just forgotten it.
5,
Because I know Mark and David Schultz, but
3, 2, 1.
damn
Sorry,
it.
you are timed out.
Yeah.
Any idea, Chris Connor?
No, because obviously it's out at the minute. The only wrestling thing I could think of was the Iron Claw, but it's obviously not that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not the Iron Claw.
No.
If I said that John DuPont was played by Steve Carell and one of the wrestling brothers was played by John Cena,
Foxcatcher, is it?
it is Foxcatcher.
Oh, okay,
right.
yeah.
I was going to say the wrestler because I was just like pulling.
I've seen
wrestling films.
Foxcatcher as well.
Oh, that's a glowing recommendation.
No, I liked it, but I just wouldn't have thought of it as a true crime film in the same way, I guess. But
Fair. Okay, number 5. This is the story of Jordan Belford.
oh, Knife. It's the
Chris
Wolf of
Connor?
Wall Street. Wolf of Wall Street.
He is indeed the Wolf of Wall Street. Hopefully, I don't need to say what crime was committed in that story. Number 6. This is the story of Elliot Ness, who is trying to nab
Knife.
Al Capone.
It's The Untouchables.
Yeah.
It's The Untouchables.
Well done.
That's one of my favorite films. So yeah, I'd be angry if I didn't
Needed
get
to
that.
get that one then. So it was that moment of when somebody's like, "That's my favorite film," and they didn't get it. So it's like,
All right. Are we ready for the next one?
Mm-hmm.
All right. This is the story of spree killer Charles Starkweather and his girlfriend.
Gun.
I don't know that one.
Chris Maxwell?
Ouch. Why have I forgot the goddamn name of the film? It's got I know the actor in it. It's testicles. Why have I forgot the name of the film? What the hell's the goddamn name of the movie? Damn it. I've forgotten the name of the film. I can't remember.
Time him out.
damn it.
Any idea?
No clue for that one.
Okay. The answer is Badlands.
Oh
I
shit!
think it's something different. No, I think it's something different.
Okay.
Okay,
Badlands
that's
was
fine.
good.
Okay. Are we ready for the next one?
Hmm.
This is the story of Eileen Wuornos.
Gun. Eileen, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
That is incorrect.
Oh,
Oh,
It is not what I have from this list.
Title.
Any idea?
No, not one I'm familiar with.
Okay. That's Monster.
Monster. That was Monster. Yeah. It's
No,
not
what
Eileen.
the Shelley's Veron one?
Yeah.
Yes.
I've not seen it.
Yeah, where she got her Oscar.
yes.
So lots of Oscars on this episode.
Yeah.
Which is frankly surprising, but okay.
Well, yeah.
Okay, this is the last question, so you might want to be quick on the mark for this one. I love how I say that and both people instinctually lean into the camera.
Sorry.
No need to apologize. I think it's funny.
Yeah.
I just have to call it out because our audience won't be able to appreciate it in the same way that I can. We ready?
Mhm.
This is the story of Tonya Harding.
Knife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I Tonya.
That is indeed I, Tonya.
Not seeing that one today.
I haven't seen it yet either, but I would know Tonya Harding because, I mean, one, just I, Tonya.
Yeah.
But two, it's a relatively famous situation that she's got herself in.
I know of Tonya. I didn't
All right,
know
so
that.
that
Never knew about Tonya. Sort of thing.
Yeah, it's just been kind of like a part of the narrative of Margot Robbie trying to get an Oscar, I guess.
She was really good in that, I think. It's the first thing where I kind of thought, you know what, because she hadn't done that much up to that point. She'd done like Wolf of Wall Street and the Suicide Squad, the first one, and then this one. I was like, oh, you know what, she's really good.
All right, so David, if you'd like to reveal the final scores.
So it was 5-2 Chris Connor winning that one. Chris Maxwell unfortunately didn't get any points. So yeah, tough one on Chris.
There were a couple of near misses though, so
Yeah.
it's not like it was a complete washout.
But yeah, Chris Connor wins that one.
I was expecting some of the names that I was expecting. I was like, but it was none of the names that I was going to go for.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Horror movie inspirations, sci-fi movie inspirations. None of them. I was like, they weren't involved.
Sorry.
Nah, it's all right. Fair enough.
Sometimes that is the nature of the end game, just where I get my sources. If they haven't covered it, I won't cover it.
Yeah, that's fair.
But So that is a congratulations to Chris Connor. Well done. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I got a few of those right.
To be fair, yeah, if you're going to stake some of them being your favorite films, it's good that you were able to get them. Also, just with such speed as well.
I knew the films for a couple of, like, obviously I knew Foxcatcher and Monster, but I wouldn't necessarily have got the links from just the name. But yeah, it's a good set of quite a diverse set of picks as well.
So, as the winner of this game, you now have the choice of which film we'll be discussing in the next episode that it will be applicable to be discussed. So do you want to go with your choice? Do you want to go with Chris's choice as the other contestant? Or do you want to hear either mine or David's films?
I think I'll stick with mine, which I don't think you guys have done before.
I don't think we would have, no.
It's Witness from 1985, which I think flies under the radar a bit with Harrison Ford films. But, Kelly McGillis was in it as well just before Top Gun. It's really good. Yeah, it's one of my favorite non-franchisee Harrison Ford films, and it's weird that it's the one that got him like lots of awards attention as well. But I think it was just coming off the back of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, so good time in his career.
Okay, excellent. So we've got Witness from yours was 1985.
February 1985, apparently. Yeah, there we go.
1985. Fantastic. And so, David, for those who want to follow along at home, where can they watch Witness? Where can they witness?
So you can catch it on Paramount Plus as a part of your subscription, which you can also have as a add-on on Prime and Apple TV. You can also rent it on Apple TV along with all the regulars, Amazon, Sky Store, and YouTube. And this episode isn't sponsored by YouTube, by the way. I know that's been mentioned quite a few times. But of course, hopefully, I guess, maybe there's a Blu-ray or DVD release out there somewhere. It was made in 1985, so I'm assuming this was still in the era in which it would have a VHS release, unlike History of Violence, which was the last VHS release, as we learned today. So yeah, go check out Witness, or Witness, as Craig said, and watch along with us at home. That'll definitely be an interesting one as well, because I think surprisingly we haven't really covered Harrison Ford's career apart from just the obvious in terms of Indiana Jones and Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. So possibly continuing the theme of we might have a history of violence in this podcast, depending on whether we change narrative at some point, because this one, even by the bio, is, a sheltered Amish child is the sole witness of a brutal murder in a restroom at a Philadelphia train station. So again, Philadelphia connection there, Chris, in terms of locations. So yeah, okay, well, we can't wait to discuss and see how that one compares and fares to A History of Violence. And as Craig alluded to, this one will be a bit of a longer wait as we've got our 100th episode celebrations. If you haven't seen already, look on our socials. We've got polls and suggestion boxes and everything going out depending on how it all evolves by the time this episode comes out, in which you can suggest to us what film you think we should discuss in that 100th episode. So anything you want to suggest, usual sort of rules in terms of time frame, so try to keep it so it isn't too modern. So at the moment we're going off 2021, so yeah, nothing from 2021 onwards, or 2022 onwards, I guess it would be. And yeah, we can't wait to sort of see which film that is. We've got other sort of specials and fun stuff happening around our anniversary as well. So yeah, lots of stuff to come. But we will eventually get to Witness and see what that leads us. So thank you both for joining us. It's been a very interesting deep dive, lots of opinions about this film, and another sort of complex one, lots of dark themes, lots of big actors, and obviously a big director, David Cronenberg. So it's been an interesting discussion. Chris Maxwell, you obviously have been discussing recently some of the projects you've been involved with. So is there anything quickly you just want to shout out, or any progression on what you've been updating us with recently?
Certainly. Well, recently, this past Valentine's Day, a short film I wrote called Dinner Date was released as part of the Strange Tales YouTube channel. You can find it on youtube.com/@strangetales, which is a collaboration with my group Dramatic Moose Productions and Watchers Productions. It's a script I wrote many years ago. I'm glad it's finally been released. If you could all check it out. And also check out the Strange Tales channel. There's some amazing short films on there, and some amazing projects to come, which I'd love to see. Dramatic Moose Productions is my theatre company and production company. You can find us Dramatic Moose Productions. Type to Google at dramatic_moose on Instagram, at Dramatic Moose on Facebook, and at Dramatic Moose at dramatic_moose on X. As for the watchers, I'd strongly suggest searching them out. You can find them at watchersproductions.com, and they're on Facebook and on Instagram and on X. And at the moment, I'm also currently working on a play as the assistant director, a play called Talk, which is a play dealing with mental health awareness, but particularly within men. It's a group of friends who've got themselves a pub lock-in for the night, and they're trying to help a friend out who's going through a really dark patch. This play will be taking place in the Market Theatre in Cowbridge from Thursday, March 28th to Saturday, March 30th. It'd be lovely if you could all come along. The tickets are all available on Eventbrite as well.
Amazing. Lots to check out there. So yeah, please do go check out those channels and those shows. Can't wait to hear more about them again as well, how they all go, and any sort of feedback you get. Thank you, Chris. Chris Connor, anything you want to shout out? Any places people can find you social-wise, or any articles or sort of platforms people should go to?
Yeah, I seem to have done a lot around the awards contenders this year. So I've done a few features and reviews and interviews around some of those. So I recently had a interview with the Poor Things composer Joskin Frendrix, I think is how you pronounce his name, which is very exciting because it's a really interesting score. And I've just done a piece for Radio Times on The Bad Batch as well, Star Wars show, which has just come back for its final season. If you're interested in kind of reading more of my stuff, my X profile is at ChrisConnor96, and Instagram is ChrisConnor96_, and there's links to my portfolio and things there. So you can check out more of my stuff.
Amazing. Yeah, go check it out. Yeah, definitely a great time for entertainment and to be reading up all about those things. Poor Things definitely does have a very crazy and kooky score. And yeah, I'm really glad to see Bad Batch back as well. It's a fantastic piece of animation. So I'm hoping to watch the beginning of that as well soon, as it's just kicked off. So yeah, thank you for joining us as well, Chris. It's been a pleasure having you on. And we can't wait to talk about your recommendation with Witness. Anything lastly from yourself, Craig?
I think given the name of this film, there's one thing our audience will have been expecting to have happened throughout this entire episode. So I feel like I need to accommodate them at this point. Ah!
What is that? What is that? No? What is that? What is it? What is it? What is violence? What is it? You know, that's what the movie's about.
Ladies and gentlemen, on this note, thank you very much for being here.
That's what the movie's about.